modern-day manifestation, funneling through California, and in that time was the 40s and the 50s, right? And how society itself was kind of breaking down. And also the industrial age is really like ramped up, right? We're continuing to move further in that direction, the digital era, all these ways in which we're disconnected to community, to our work, to our families. Like now, even, divorce starts to increase, like all these different things that come to fore. And then also thinking about surf culture, mainstream culture as a whole, there's that counterculture quality to it. Understanding that all the things that people bought into in the past aren't real. And so people are kind of fighting that and fighting the machines. And so you have the rise of like the hippies, as well as the rise of surf as this counterculture activity. It's back to nature. But then at some point, everything kind of loses its way because there isn't that balance. There's, so I just wonder where that place is where we can find a balance, and so that surfing, for example, is not this wayward, hedonistic and just lost pursuit in the way that even drugs can be helpful in, when it's used in a way that I don't know who would administer that, but, there are uses for that. For example, like Albert Hoffman, his ideas for LSD were always about how do we assist, like how do we help find a way out of mental health issues and schizophrenia and all these things. So like that balance I find is kind of hard. And then also I think about surf culture in that time, and the way society also is changing in terms of, the white patriarchy and how that's also shifting. And I feel like we still see the effects of that internal war today in this rise of the orange guy and his, and the orange curtain and all that. But anyway, that's a lot.
Did you just equate the surf industry with Donald Trump, the orange curtain?
Do not say his name, please. But I just think about this overall, as a culture, as a surf culture, how maybe there's also that, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but how we're seeing the internal kind of conflict with how there are all these big changes happening in the culture, and how we can kind of draw parallels to society's changes and shifts from, the utopian values of the 60s and the early 70s to what comes after, and how, I always think about that Maisel film, Gimme Shelter, like such an incredible encapsulation and representation of, and without even having to say it, it's just about the Rolling Stones concert, right? But you are there out in the field with all the hippies, and it's just like there's excitement and it feels very free. And then as the thing progresses, and what we're left with at the end was like the end of an era, right? And then it's like there's something really dark there. There's a sense of chaos that is really dark and uncontrollable. So I just think about like what, in terms of addiction, even surf as a high, like when does it get to that dark place, and then how can we shift it back to that useful place where it can be very just valuable in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, and what's coming to mind as I listen to you is like a Polynesia before or right after contact, where there was a kind of place of surfing. But even then, it's interesting, they would drop everything and go surfing.
Right.
They would take off their clothes. And this is what scandalized the missionaries like Hiram Bingham. You're like, wait, where are you going? Oh, the waves have come up.
You got Crocs.
You got work to do. But the Hawaiians themselves honored it. There was not actually a controversy. The priests say, Lono's here. Come down to the beach and honor him. He's the surf god. And they would all go surfing. There would be kind of maybe sex in the shore break. There would be nudity. There would also be gambling because people are betting on who's better at surfing and so forth.
I just imagine the missionaries. Can you imagine?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Calvinist missionaries.
With their values.
Shocking. Like the nudity.
Sex on the beach.
I actually had a good pun occur to me the other day. Is how you say drop trowel? They would drop trowel, but they would also drop trowel. See, they're both dropping trowel.
Right.
And
I like what you did there.
Trowel. Yeah. Joyce, move over. So. That's the only model I have in my mind is a kind of surfing in Polynesia, pre-contact or right after contact, where there's a place for it. And I remember when On a Wave came out, I was in touch with a guy who taught college in Hawaii. He's like, you should come out here and consider, teaching and surfing and living, on Oahu. And I was like, if I came out to Hawaii, you think I'd be able to keep my life together?
Exactly.
And he's like, no, we have it integrated. We surf in the morning and we work. I'm like, I just couldn't see it.
The East Coaster in you, it makes it difficult for the East Coaster surfer too, because I do think East Coasters are probably more obsessive potentially than other places where there's, and it's not just East Coast, it's places where surf is infrequent in general, as opposed to some places where surf is plentiful and bountiful.
It comes back to intermittent reinforcement.
Exactly.
We're more focused, ironically or paradoxically, you're more intent than you would be in these places where it's like this wave-rich place. No problem, brah. Take your time. It'll still be there. No, it won't be there.
Exactly.
That's us,
you don't
right?
know what it's like.
It'll be gone in 4 hours. But in Hawaii, they chill out and look. Let's watch for about 45 minutes and see what it's really doing before we paddle out. Like, what?
But not only that, it's like, I feel like we obsess over the culture, the history a bit more, because when we don't have surf, we need something to satisfy that urge. So we read magazines, we read books, we obsess over, we create podcasts and talk about it, and
we write books about it.
We write books about it.
And the actual people doing it full on, the hardcore core surfers, they're not only not writing them, they're not going to read this book.
Yeah.
They don't need it to be theorized. It's kind of like jazz, It's like, just tap your foot, bro.
Yeah.
Just nod your head if you get it. There's a lot of that in surfing. It's a hipster culture in that way, and there's a kind of embarrassment or a kind of scorn for intellectualization of surfing. And I get it. And I'm just like, at some level, I'm the same. But I also, as a writer, found it really challenging to try to translate the subculture and the kind of the hipster culture of surfing for non-surfers.
Yeah,
that's hard.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
And that was what made it interesting as a task, as opposed to writing a novel about, New York literary culture.
Yeah,
that's easy.
That's easy because those people get it. Whereas surfers, you have or non-surfers,
you're going to write it about them, but they're not actually going to read it.
Yeah, a lot of them.
And everyone's got their own opinion. Like, everyone's too close to it that they're like, yeah, that's not me.
That's actually not it.
That's not true. Or,
well, they're in denial, like a lot of addicts are,
But I also feel like, it still has those, like, counterculture qualities in that, like, no matter what anyone tries to, like, pin on them, they're like, no, doesn't apply.
That doesn't get it.
Yeah.
To your point about, like, what comes next, I also think, right, like, and this is going to get really nerdy here. Big Wednesday.
No.
Big Wednesday does a really wonderful job of showing the phases of surfing, the obsession of the youth, the tribal aspect, but then there's this isolation aspect, where, there's William Catt or PT surfing alone, and Bear even says you're always surfing alone when you're in the ocean, and then there's this whole like coming together towards the end again, and I think that's kind of like a lot of surfers go through those phases where when in your youth of surfing, and this is not youth, like you're even in the beginning of surfing, right? Like there's this community you form, I think, with other beginners maybe. Like we had Diane Cardwell on the show, and she's talking about this tribe she forms at the entry of her surfing even, and as you progress and you get better, it starts to go off. And you talk about this in the book, and you also talk about it in a few other shows where, the momentum generation and Andy Irons, and they go and they have this core group. Then they go off onto their own because they have their own endeavors and they have competition and all these other things. And that isolation, kind of surrounds some of them. And then they indulge in other things. And then there's this coming together after going through the trials and tribulations towards the end where they come together as a group again, but it's not as tight as before, but there's an understanding at least and a knowingness that these people are still my tribe, but they are not here every day and they're not in my life every day, but they're still there also. And surfing is still there for me also, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well said. I mean, I think there's a lot of tribal, there's a kind of atavistic tribal formation socially with surfing and gangs. Everyone sneers at gangs and it's like, oh, it's just teenagers and knuckleheads. But this is the social form of humanity, the tribe. It's no joke, and it didn't go away until very recently.
Mm-hmm.
But when you grow it, for surfers, there's a tribe of the teen years, and then in the 20s, what happens is surfing is subject to the pressures of the dominant. What's the dominant? It's capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
and capitalism is not about the group. Capitalism is about the individual. And
Right.
it's not only capitalism, but it's like entrepreneurial capitalism is in our culture, which is even worse in a way. It's more individual. My little brand, my Instagram,
Yes.
my little trip.
Oh.
I'm on my own. I don't have health care. I don't have jack. I've got to make it from scratch every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's intensely sad and isolating. And whatever thing that whatever you got from being part of the tribe and the gang is going to reemerge in your 20s and 30s when you have to kind of make it on your own and no one gives a damn. And the ones who were really good are off on the world tour and they're super isolated, ironically.
Yes.
And then the ones who stayed back and are just locals, they have their own kind of isolation. So it's very hard. And I think that I like the way you were talking about that movie is working through that problem.
Yeah.
Though. But I do think it's gotten worse in a way. Back to your point about the kind of dystopic contemporary world. It is in a way worse now than it was when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But I do, there's a level at which I really earnestly wondered whether I made a huge mistake just leaving my hometown. Like, what was so wrong with Melbourne Beach that you had to go to the big city, man? Like, what is wrong with you? And I really like that haunts me at some level when I go back there. I'm like, why did you leave? Everyone else left. Don't get me wrong. Everyone else, no one I know from that era, except one or two people, are still there. I mean, it's like really different. And
wait, I don't understand. What is it about Melbourne that you feel like you've missed out by not staying
being
there?
a local. Everywhere I
Gotcha.
go now, I'm who the hell is this guy? I rock up at Casino Pier and I talk to the alpha local. He's like, who the fuck do you think you are talking to me? I'm like, dude, I'm not. I have no beach anymore. I just wherever I go. But I like to kind of mess with the social order of surfing at that level. Like, hey, did we split that peak or did I drop in on you? And the guy's like, what? You're talking to me? I'm Joey. Like, no one talks to me who doesn't know me.
Well, there's something to be said about being older and as you get older, wanting to feel like you belong to a certain community, want to be a local somewhere over time. And, that's why I haven't left New York in some ways,
Because I don't know. I feel like it'd be easier being a local if my break was, Uluwatu, it's different.
For sure. No, right. If you had a break that you were willing to get localized about, you would think differently about it, for one thing. Yeah, very few people have a local break that is actually worth fighting over.
Yeah,
they're like, okay, fine, whatever. And the thing is, the Casino Pier used to be that way.
Yeah, well, it used to be a good wave.
Why was it a good wave? Because of the pier.
Yeah.
Sandy blew that thing out of the water, and now you go back, it's just like, oh, it happens to be a good sandbar here this spring. But the guys who grew up surfing in the shadow of that pier are kind of like, whoa.
Do they seem lost? Do they?
A bit. To me, I kind of certainly, if I were writing in the novel of this place, it would be they're lost because they're out in the glare. It's like, what happened to my shadow? What happened to the pier that was my identity? And this is where climate change kicks in.
Yeah.
And you get into an interesting conversation about the way climate change is changing and the coastal realm and taking things that are quasi-permanent, like a 300-foot pier with a roller coaster on top of it. How the hell did that get knocked out of the water? And you go there, and I start to really brood about, like, even the name Casino Pier.
Yeah, because it's not that anymore.
There. It's like a toponym. There are certain terms that are about place names. So you say, like, a Casino Pier that has the pier in it. Well, where's the pier now?
Well, it's like Coast Guard station and out in Long Island. There's no Coast Guard station there anymore. But they still call it that. There's still something there connected to it, or that lineage, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, climate change for sure is changing that. Also, gentrification of beach communities
Right.
is changing a lot of that.
The class composition of surfing